Here are my takeaways from Byline Time's 3-part investigation into Dan Wootton, along with some lingering questions. Number 1, Dan has issues around homosexuality. There is some sort of self-loathing going on here. It shows up everywhere. He reveals men as gay or bi in his writing. Anti-trans point of views show up in his writing. And both in the workplace and online, he targets straight men and tries to get them to admit they're gay or put them in compromising situations. There's something pathological here. The next thing is Dan's workplace behavior tracks with what we've heard about him online. He is conniving, ruthless, sneaky. Basically everything that he is alleged to do online and with his partners fits the track record for certain tabloids and how they operate. And I think Dan points to this idea that nothing actually really changed with the phone hacking scandals. Yes, News of the World closed, but people like Dan just hopped over to The Sun. And I think what the series perhaps does is open up that larger issue of have things actually changed in the tabloid industry? Did the media reform? And that kind of hurts the argument that they've made in court against Prince Harry and others, that times were different, things have changed, the bad apples are gone, News of the World is closed. This is a non-issue. But is it? Some of my lingering questions. What is bigger than Dan Wootton in this case? I do wonder if Dan is endgame here. Because as of right now, GB News that he currently works for, The Sun, his previous employer, and a lot of the British media are not talking about the story. Why are they so hell-bent on protecting Dan, specifically The Sun? And I think that relates to the 11th hour settlements made by The Sun to some of his accusers in the workplace. Because if those things had escalated to an employee tribunal, the information about Dan and allegations could have all come to light. Public view. You don't want that if it's real bad, which is the only reason I can imagine The Sun protecting Dan. I also wonder if they're trying to turn Dan into this larger political, cultural, anti-wokeness crusade. I need to look more into this, but Dan is currently crowdfunding to fight allegations of bribery. He's crowdfunding through Democracy 3.0, which was established in April of 2021. Why this newer outlet? I don't know. And I'm also curious where, if you fundraise over £10,000, where that 7% goes to. I need to look more into this. Y'all, it's going to be so good. This may be my afternoon treat. My final question has to do with how did Dan get the money to pay off all these men, especially in the case of part 3 that focuses on his first victim. He wasn't pulling in the kind of money to get £5,000 a week to give to this person. And other amounts that he is offered as Martin Branning are upwards of £30,000. So at first I considered that maybe there actually is a third party and there's someone else Dan is working for, but I can't quite see how that would make sense. But based on part 2, maybe Dan was just billing The Sun, putting it down as information gathered, and was able to hide these little payments. They do discuss how Dan had access to the payment system to see who journalists were paying to scoop up their contacts. Who's to say he didn't do the same to pay out people for this project? Anyway, just some thoughts.